Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about compassion. Welcome to another episode of The Mindful Addict with Darren Ford. So the first thing that we in the West, I think, confuse the idea of compassion with is altruism. It could be argued that there's no such thing as altruism. And let me explain what that means. First of all, what is altruism? The idea of altruism is to give of oneself without expecting or gaining anything back. At least I hope that's the definition. I don't know if that's the Webster's definition, but that's close to the meaning of it. And the truth is that there's always a relationship between giver and receiver. There's always a relationship when you give something to somebody because you gain something back. I always tell people, be careful who you point at because you always have three fingers pointing back at yourself. Everything exists in relationship to everything else. And so when we think about this idea of compassion, it's not just giving to somebody without expecting something back. In fact, I would argue that that's really called codependency, where you give something without expecting anything back, or you give something without realizing that you are gaining something back. And so compassion is more about offering something, knowing that you're gaining something back. I almost feel like Mr. Rogers there, putting my shoes on. Compassion is a muscle that can be strengthened. And in fact, we know that when people do specific meditative practices around the idea of compassion, that not only is their ability to give compassion increased, but the neural connections in their brain around the centers in their brain that have to do with compassion actually become more dense. And this is research done by Richard Daverson, and John Kabat-Zinn out of the Mind and Life Institute. You can Google it or look it up. But anyways, they did fMRI studies or, certain types of x-rays of the skull and of the neurons. And so what you need to know about compassion is it's not something that's built overnight, and it's something that you can start cultivating for yourself and for other people right now. Like, there doesn't need to be a pie in the sky event. You don't need to sit in a formal meditative stance like I was, although doing that can create the process of change quicker, right? And so what I want to do is use an example of a runner to explain how we can strengthen the muscle of compassion. When I started running, I run, as I fall over here, I run now, I try to run about 100 miles a month. Believe me, I didn't used to run anywhere near that. As you guys know, I think I've talked about how I had to learn to walk again. And so, I continued to practice strengthening my ability to walk, and then pretty soon I started running. And when I first got on the treadmill, I couldn't even do a 4 mile walk in an hour. It was pretty rough. But with discipline, consistency, and compassion, I continued to strengthen my ability to do the runs. And now, I'm almost 50 and I can do a 7-minute, 30-second mile, which is crazy. I couldn't even run that when I was in high school. Now, why am I talking about my running in relation to compassion? Well, because just like a runner who consistently runs strengthens his or her ability to run, or their ability to run, a person that practices compassion for themselves and compassion for other people strengthens their ability to offer compassion to the world. So the more you give, the more you have to give. And illustrations of this can be recognizing when you're judging yourself, and reminding yourself that it's okay to be human. So, in recovery, we judge ourselves all the time. We reflect on the wreckage of our past and we're like, oh my God, I'm such a terrible person. I'm no angel. I've done awful things in my life. Awful things. I have 2 years of my life where I have no memory. God knows what I did. All of that being said, I also know that I was in an illness and that I'm not active in that illness anymore. And when I'm not active in that illness, I don't do those things. And nor do you. And so afford yourself compassion. Now, compassion is different than consequences, by the way. What I'm saying here is not that you won't have consequences for the choices that you made. We all will have consequences for the choices in our active addiction. We don't choose our consequences. The world chooses our consequences. But when we're sober, we can choose our actions. So when that mind spits out those harsh, judgmental, self-aggressive thoughts, we need to counter them. And what I would often do is I would tell myself, if I took the time to think about negative self-judgment, I can take the time to think about something loving for myself. And so that's what I would do. Just thinking about something loving or just offering yourself forgiveness is a compassionate act. And the more you do this for yourself, the greater the ability is for you to continue to do it in the future. When we go to bed at night, whatever we were thinking is most likely going to be the thing that we think about when we wake up. So we want to try to think about loving, compassionate thoughts so that we can have more loving compassion. I mean, we obviously can't judge ourselves into recovery. We obviously can't whip ourselves and shame ourselves and beat ourselves up and engage in negative, self-aggressive and hateful acts towards the self into recovery. It doesn't work. If it did, we would all be in recovery, we'd all be sober, we never would have been addicts. So we need to start offering a counterbalance to that. So we do that by offering ourselves acceptance and forgiveness and compassion and kindness and gentleness. We also do that by offering the same to other people. When we do it for other people, it doesn't mean we don't set boundaries with other people. It doesn't mean we don't set limits with other people. But just because we set a boundary with somebody, we don't have to do that with aggression. Just because we tell somebody, no, this is not okay for me, we don't have to do that with hatred. We can do that with a loving, firm, compassionate act. One of my business partners, colleagues, and a great mentor, Mari Lee, she would always say, I'm gently but firmly reminding you, and then she would set the boundary. And that's such a beautiful quality to be able to offer other people, right? When we're on the freeway, instead of yelling at the person who's in front of us, or when we yell at the person who cuts us off, to then take a breath and say, wait a minute, I wonder what's going on in their lives, right? Expand our thought awareness to make a greater ability to see that that person is not just that act. That person is the totality of the events that happened in their life, just like we are. And so compassion is all about fostering an alignment with reality, which is underneath all of it, underneath all of the aggressive, reactive ness that's in the world, is a human being who's just as lost and confused as you and I are, trying to find their way in a world without a guidebook. And so when we start to accept that reality, when we start to see things for what they are, we can start to practice that non-judgmental, compassionate action. Compassion is not, they hit me, let them hit me again. No, that's not compassion. Compassion is a fostering of actions and behaviors that allow us to continue to connect on a deep level to ourselves and to other people. Compassion creates connection. It creates a gentle, abiding awareness of where we are in our lives and who we are in relationship to other people. And there's a wonderful saying in the mindfulness world, which is, if it's starting to get overwhelming, make the container bigger, right? Is to remind yourself that it's not just you or this moment in time, right? That is the definition of your life, right? This moment in time will pass. So the idea of allowing yourself forgiveness and others forgiveness and offering compassion to others is why it's so vitally important. And there's a famous author, Viktor Frankl, who wrote an amazing book, which is a staple for any psychology student going through a master's program, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was a psychologist who was interned in World War II in a Nazi concentration camp. And sometimes he kept notes for this book that he wrote on tattered pieces of clothing, and he wrote on those tattered pieces of clothing in his own blood. And he observed the prisoners there, and he noticed two reactions that the mind had to being interned in that in the concentration camp he was in. One was one of just giving up, just laying on the wire mesh in their beds, because there were no mattresses. It was just the wire that they would lay on in their own waste. And then there were the people that would take their little piece of bread and they'd break it and they'd give it to the other person. And what he noticed, what Viktor says, Dr. Frankl says in his book, is that the ones that survived were the ones that broke their bread and gave it to other people. That it was the ones that found meaning and purpose through compassionate behavior that lived. And if you want to thrive in recovery, if I want to thrive in recovery, we all have to work actively on practicing compassion, saying hi to people, right? Just saying hi to people when you see them. Just, hi, how are you, right? Wishing them a good day when they leave the elevator. These small acts build upon each other. Just like the small acts when we were in our active addiction built upon each other, right? When we were in our active addiction and we reached out to our drug dealer, or we called people who we partied with all the time. Those are small acts that built upon each other and pretty soon turned into a snowball that destroyed our lives. These small acts of compassion, kindness, and recovery, of forgiveness, of non-judgmentalness, right? These will build upon each other. And as they build, they'll create not a snowball, but a huge change in our lives. And one day you'll wake up, you'll be in the elevator, you'll say bye to somebody, and it'll just be a habit. And all of a sudden you'll have this awareness. And you'll be like, oh my God, you know what? I do this automatically now. And how do I know that? Because that's what's happened to me after the years of practice. And no, I'm not somebody special. It's not, we're all capable of doing this for ourselves. We just have to have a consistent practice process. We will never get perfect at it. I still get mad at the person who cuts me off on the freeway. I also laugh at myself about it, and that's the human condition, right? And when it gets overwhelming for me, I reach out for help. I cannot say how important that is, right? We should all have at least 5 people who know our whole story, all the ins and outs, right? That's just necessary for our recovery. And so is the practice of compassion. So remember, compassion isn't a pie in the sky thing. Compassion isn't about, putting on, monk's robes and living this, aesthetic life. No, it's very practical human behaviors. It's daily activities where we choose to be kind, where we choose to offer love to ourselves and to others. That's the process of compassion. And let's be honest, we've already tried the other way. It didn't work. So, if you want to change something in your life, guess what? You got to change something in your life. So we got to do it different. So thank you so much. I hope that you have a wonderful day. Be gentle with yourself. Bye-bye.